Going back to the Big Bang you were talking about, the Big Bang just doesn't logically make sense to me because one of the laws that govern the universe is that matter cannot be created or destroyed. So if matter cannot be created or destroyed, the Big Bang makes no sense unless there was an all knowing, all powerful God or mind to create the universe. Matter simply could not have created itself from nothing. But I do want to delve further into the realm of heresy and sort of apply that metaphorical poetic interpretation of the Bible. Could that same idea be applied to Darwinism or the theory of evolution, for example, as opposed to creationism? Because isn't it possible that, the Bible says God created man. So isn't it possible that he created the conditions for man to come to fruition in the universe?
I would say it's certainly possible. I think God can create man however he wants, and far be it from me to restrain it. Darwinism is an interesting one because there are, unlike the Big Bang, which, as you say, if you can believe in a creative mind, the Big Bang makes sense. If you can't, it's total gobbledygook, which is why people, do multiverse theory and stuff. Um, Darwinism seems to me to have a lot of problems as a scientific theory. And there are people working in evolutionary biology right now who are pointing out, for instance, that there's really not enough time, even in the time scale of this vastly older universe than we previously thought. There's not enough time from the genesis of life on Earth to now to get the biodiversity that we have based on kind of current Darwinist thinking. And so when I say that, I'm not at all saying like, and therefore Darwin was wrong about everything. There is no evolution. Mankind was dropped fully formed. I'm just saying like, it seems like the jury is kind of still out on this one, and this is where there's a lot of defensiveness on the scientific side, and people get very, very angry when you say, I don't really think that they've figured this out, but they haven't figured this out yet. That having been said, right, if in fact it turns out that first there was lizards, and then I'm making this up, but like first there was lizards, then there was chickens, then there were monkeys, then there was us, right? If that's what it turns out to be, then we absolutely could attribute that to God, right? We would just say, first of all, the conditions, the laws under which this development happens are being laws require some sort of mind to design them. And perhaps more importantly, the product of this evolutionary chain is something totally unnecessary to, like, from an evolutionary survivalist perspective, right? The fact that at the end of this you end up with a mind that can do poetry. um, this is something that, for instance, Yuval Harari is like totally perplexed by. If you read Homo Deus and Sapiens, he's like, why do we need feelings, right? Why do we need like sensation and all this stuff? And the answer is because that was the whole point, right? There's no from an evolutionary perspective, if you could take away all of our feelings and just leave all of our reactions to stuff, and we were able to calculate and we were able to make decisions, but we never felt fear or anger or desire or pain. From an evolutionary perspective, that would be preferable. That would be great, because like then we would just not be tormented by all these weird things like ethics. So even if you are an evolutionist, you have to answer like, why did this bizarre thing come into being? What purpose does it serve? And if the answer is none, then maybe this was the point all along, and maybe we've been directed in this way. So yeah, I'm not an evolutionist just because I don't think that the science is settled, but I'm very comfortable with evolution as an idea for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting idea to grapple with if you're going to take that sort of poetic interpretation of the Bible. But I want to talk about objective reality, which, you've talked about on your podcast, Young Heretics. Are you familiar with Donald Hoffman?
I don't think so.
Okay, so he was on the Lex Friedman podcast. I'm a big fan of, and I listened to his episode. So Donald Hoffman's argument is that space and time are simply the interface we use to view reality. Our perception is an evolutionary trait that we have developed to allow us to live long enough to reproduce. Because he argues that our brains are simply incapable of comprehending the complexity of the truth of the universe beyond space and time. There is an objective truth basically underlying everything, but our perception of reality is incapable of seeing it. It's like I'm looking at this computer screen right now. If I were to, manually connect all these complicated computer circuits to produce a single pixel on a screen, like that's unrealistic, that's unattainable. So I have this computer interface to do all that for me. And he's arguing that our brain and our consciousness and our perception sort of functions in that same way, that creates space and time as an interface to view reality.
Mm. Yeah, so this is very close to Immanuel Kant, the idea that the things that we think of as hard coded into existence are actually endowed, like existence is endowed with space and time by our minds as a function, as a funneling mechanism, basically. And I think that there's a lot to this. Aristotle, in his treatise on language, talks about that experience, that set of experiences that you were reacting to when you were looking at the bees and the sun, and that all of those qualitative realities. um, the word for this in Aristotle is a pathema tes psyches. It's an inward state of the soul, or a kind of thing that the soul, an imprint upon the soul. And one of the things that seems true is that we all are affected by the outside world in ways that are structurally analogous. Like, you're not seeing the same thing that I'm seeing right now, but we're both experiencing space and time. As an example, we're both seeing colors. There's a whole range of things that we actually can't help but see when we experience the world. And these are part of the network of our brain, right? They're just kind of baked in. And so what Kant would say, and it sounds like this guy is sort of agreeing in some ways, is that, you know in order for us to perceive, we have to perceive in space and time. And so space and time are realities insofar as we are realities, because we can't exist without them existing. Like, we can't wish them away. um, and also, I think Aristotle would add, the things outside of us are affecting us because that is their nature, right? It's like there's part of their nature is that when they meet us, they take on this particular shape in space and time. So we think of these as, like, subjective features of reality. And you think if something's subjective, it's just in your head, maybe it's arbitrary or whatever. But really, all the word subjective means is that there's a subject perceiving it, right? And so if there's an element of subjective perception that is unchangeable, that's baked in, then in some sense that's just as real as what we think of as an objective reality, which is like something inert outside of us. So it comes back again, I think, to that relationship between consciousness and the outside world.
So even though there are beyond things that we cannot perceive, beyond our ability to observe, they still affect us.
Yes, I think that's the idea, right? I think is that there is, I mean, in Kant, in Aristotle, in these evolutionary theories too, there's always something outside of us, like the pixels on the computer, right? There's all of this stuff that is imperceptible to us. Some of it is categorically imperceptible to us. Like, we don't have the equipment to perceive it in its essence, but it's making an impact on us, right? In the same way that a particle might make an impact upon a electromagnetic sensor. There is something that happens to us because of the outside world. We didn't create the outside world, and we also can't choose for the outside world to be otherwise just by thinking about it. But the way that it is in our sort of mind space, I think, is constructed by the meeting between the outside world and the structure of our minds.
That makes sense.